we head down the east coast, following the sort of clockwise route of Marianne Ockter, and a site that she addresses, which is Sutton Hoo. And I could tell you so much about Sutton Hoo, but I shall try and keep it short. Sutton Hoo is an internationally famous site, and it's famous because it has produced the excavations area just before the Second World War in 1938 and 1939. There were later excavations in the 60s and the 80s and 90s and the noughties, but the most famous find ever, and it's an icon of British his archaeology, is the Mound 1 helmet from Sutton Hoo, which is from Mary Ann's book here, which is in the British Museum. They never dug this up looking like this. This is about 10 years worth of conservation to try and piece back the jigsaw to try, and they got it wrong once and pulled it all apart again and started again.
Oh
But
no.
this is as close as we have it, and it's an icon of Britain's past, but actually it's most likely made in southern Scandinavia in the very end of the 6th or early 7th century, and
There
it
was
was
a lot
buried.
more items found with it, right?
Oh yeah, so it's
Yeah.
most famous for Mound 1, which was excavated in the second year of excavations in 1939 by Basil Brown, and then a national team of prominent archaeologists brought in to help him because he found a 31-meter long rowing
Boat.
boat
Yeah.
buried in the mound, and at the centre a chamber, and in the chamber the richest burial ever found from British soil, and it dates to the, as I said, the very early 7th century, and the common interpretation is it's the
Okay.
burial of a pagan king of East Anglia, and people have even speculated it is the name of the historical king who's recorded by the Venerable Bede as an apostate who adopts Christianity and goes, his wife says, bad idea, dude, and he goes, all right then, and he gives up on the idea, but the king is Redwald, and so we often call Mound 1 the burial of King Redwald of East Anglia. This is long before there was an England, and he was king of an emerging kingdom called East Anglia, the Eastern Angles, who were still pagan but were dabbling in Christianity. And it's not a one burial alone. There's up to 19 burial mounds on the ridge above the river, and they all have different kinds of burial. Some of them by cremation, some of them inhumation, but the only two haven't been robbed, and this is one of them. And so
Wow.
Sutton Hoo, there's so much to talk about Sutton Hoo, but for me, what's
Yeah.
important is that it's a famous site. You can go and visit it. It's got a visitor centre. There's a cafe. You can walk around the burial mounds. The burial mounds don't survive only as small little humps. They're not impressive, but because we've excavated these mounds, they've been robbed before, but we've worked out the story, and we can tell you about the burial rites of the East Anglian kings before they formally adopt Christianity. And there's so much more to say. There's other burials that have been excavated. There's also prehistoric remains from the site, of course, and there's other things to say. But for me,
And
Sutton Hoo is one of the top 12.
you can find a lot of free information about this particular site
Oh yeah.
on your WordPress.
Oh yes, I've done blog posts about it. My ArchaeoDeath
Yes.
site.
If
I've
you Google and scroll down, your selfie is right beside the treasure.
Yes, yes. I thought, the tradition of doing selfies with museum exhibits. I just had to do it. You just have to do it.
Well, you made
It's.
Google search. You made the Google image
Oh, you mean
search.
on the main Google page?
Yes, yes. I googled the Sutton Hoo treasure, and I'm scrolling, and 5 rows down, Archaeodeath, WordPress.com, and it's your selfie with that helmet.
Well, the thing is, it's a really weird site because the grave goods from Mound 1 are called the treasure. And I've done a recent research paper arguing we should stop calling it treasure because it was legally never treasure. Because to be treasure, you had to make the argument that it had, it was buried to be retrieved. And it wasn't. It was a,
It
it
was a
was a
grave
burial, a
site.
funeral. So it was never legally treasure. Therefore, when it was discovered, it was the landowners, not the state. But she generously gave it to the British Museum. So it's not treasure in a legal sense. And in the early medieval sense, it wouldn't have been treasure. So the gold clasp, the purse mount, the sword, the shield, the 3 spears, the lamp, the gaming board, the mail shirt. I could go
They
on
would
and
have had to
on.
pay me. They would have had to pay
Well,
me.
it's a lot. It's a lot of good
They would
stuff. It wasn't
they would have had to
treasure.
pay me something.
She
They
was
would have
she
had to pay
was
me something.
she was a very generous lady because I think the state wouldn't have been able to afford it because obviously going through the Second World War and
Oh Lord, yeah.
yeah, and it's really interesting. People paper over the fact that the Sutton Hoo ship burial was not. Everyone says, oh, it was a very patriotic, timely find as Britain was at peril from Germany.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
actually, a lot of archaeologists and a lot of continental archaeologists were spinning it. And Hitler and his cronies who are interested in archaeology big time were spinning it. That, this is further evidence of the shared ancestry of our superior race. There was very much. They were called, and in fact, it's really sketchy. Look at the original reports from 1939. T.D. Kendrick of the British Museum was calling it a fabulous Teutonic grave. And I'm not saying that these British archaeologists were, I don't know what their politics were, but all I'm saying is that even facing off against Nazi Germany, British society wasn't as the narrative, the gloss we give is that the learned classes, the aristocrats of Britain were obviously all opposed to this. No, there was a lot of Anyway, I'll leave it there.
That was why Churchill gave his warning.
Yeah,
and that's why Churchill's warning is so famous, is because you weren't taking it serious.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was at your doorstep.
Yeah. So I mean, the Sutton Hoo ship burial, when in the pre-war year write-ups, it's actually quite disturbing how it was being used by archaeologists across Europe to sort of hint at a shared affinity that could have fed into politics.
That were all one. Yeah. Kind of one thing. And now, what do we know about the person who was wearing that mask?
Well, this is the thing. From the account of the Venerable Bede, a century later, he is a fabulous war leader. He kicks basically, he's one of the few kings who beats Penda of Mercia, his pagan rival. And from Bede, who's writing in Northumbria, Penda is the nemesis of his ancestors, because Penda basically slaughtered 2 Northumbrian kings in battle, kicked the ass out of the West Saxons, and the only king who could really face up to him, well, there's Quichelm, who's one West Saxon king, didn't. The records that we have, such as they are, tell us that he didn't lose battles against Penda, but it doesn't mean he won any. But East Anglia, Redwald was renowned as a war leader, and his kingdom was kind of geographically protected because of the fens and up to the west. So East Anglia was more in those days a promontory than it is now, and it looks very much like it's tied into the rest of England, but culturally and geographically, East Anglia has always been weird. And I say that knowing that East Anglians are going to be listening to this going, but it's true, you're all weird over there. Everyone teases people from Norfolk and Suffolk, which is still the counties that preserve the division of the East Anglian Old English Kingdom, the North folk and the South folk, and they are a separate thing, and so they were geographically very discrete. So they were a culturally distinctive and militarily powerful king, and his time was one. I mean, the last East Anglian king was killed by the Danes, and that was St Edmund, who was beatified as Saint Edmund, the martyr. The martyr. And of Bury St Edmund's fame, but right up until the 9th century, East Anglia was a major power, economic, social, political power, and we have to remember that England wasn't there yet, and so it's a lovely.
It was an idea.
Yeah, it was just an idea, and it wasn't even a coherent idea. So the kings of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were often allied with British kingdoms against each other. There was a lot of fluidity in political as well as religious matters in the 7th century.
Yeah, people like to think of it as like it was just English. Dropped my headphone. People like to think of, it was always just English. It was first Roman, and then it was just, the leftover Romans made England. But that's not at all. It was vast. All these little pockets of power and struggle and war.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just this instantaneous king. I'm the king of England. Like, it wasn't this at all.
I mean, in many ways, England's formation is an accident, and it wouldn't have probably happened if it hadn't been for the Danes kicking out all of the other kings, that the West Saxons were the last one standing. Which is, that's another story though. That's another story. That's 2.5 centuries in the future from the time of Redwald, but it's an interesting story nonetheless, that to think of a time before England when we have these archaeological traces of a burial site of people experimenting with different ways of.
Yes.
And of course now it's the focus of a Netflix film, The Dig, which is a fictional version of the discovery of which has got issues with it. It's wrong in detail, but it's a wonderful film.
At this point, everything Netflix does is like History Channel quality. Like, there's nothing credible as far as historically. I mean,
but this is actually, if compared with the Ancient Aliens nonsense and the
Graham Hancock
and all that stuff, this is a really
Cave of Bones,
well represented depiction of the 1930s in Britain. So compared, it's so I just got to take count your blessings really that they got that right.
Good, because they have been striking out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's very poor, very poor.